Sycamore May, and I'm the Director of Sustainability and Communications at Handsome Brook Farms. Thank you so much to the Riverside Park Conservancy for hosting this speaker series. So honored to be a part of this. So today we'll talk about the state of our food system and its future. So a little bit of background about me. I grew up in New York surrounded by an active farming community. My curiosity about food and where it comes from led me to work on organic vegetable farms in New York and then Arkansas. And I was surprised about the challenges organic farmers face compared to conventional farmers. This curiosity drove me to study food policy at the University of London. And it was there that I learned about the intricacies of the food system and how food policies are made. For the past 5 years, I've been working at Handsome Brook Farms, which is a pasture-raised organic egg company that works with over 100 predominantly Amish and Mennonite farmers in 10 states. Through my work, I have focused on building out social and environmental programming for the company, and I've also worked with farmers on projects that restore soil health and drive ecological sustainability. For example, here I am on Matthew Garman's farm in central Pennsylvania, where after we excavated some land to plant peach trees, Matthew's daughter, Maddie, helped by handing me a worm. That's what she's doing in this picture. In addition to my work at Handsome Brook Farms, over the past few years, I've also engaged in policy work with the New York City Food Policy Center and Food Tank, which is a global food advocacy nonprofit. In today's discussion, we'll dive into the challenges and opportunities within the U.S. food system. Specifically, we'll explore U.S. farm subsidies, the challenges of growing food organically, how my work at Handsome Brook Farms has responded to these challenges, and we'll discuss some policy solutions. And you'll get to get your hands in some dirt, which will be fun. So before I go any further, can I ask who here works within the food system? Okay, got some people. So some of this might be a little repetitive for you guys, but I'm hoping that you'll still have thoughts to share and things to learn. So let's start with an overview of the U.S. food system. So the U.S. is a global leader in agriculture with major crops including corn, soybeans, barley, and oats, grown predominantly in the Midwest and accounting for 90% of the country's harvested acreage. The majority of these crops are grown conventionally, meaning that they're grown in monocultures, so all of the same thing in the same place, with chemical pesticides. This year, the U.S. will produce over 450 million metric tons of these crops. So to put that into context, if you lined up 450 million tons of these commodities in standard freight trucks, each carrying about 25 tons, the convoy would stretch around the Earth's equator nearly 7.5 times. So this predominance of certain crops like corn and other grains is largely driven by the U.S. export market and as a result of federal subsidies, which we'll get into in a little bit. In recent years, consumer preferences are shifting towards organic and locally sourced foods. In 2022, U.S. organic food sales reached a record $60 billion, despite challenges such as inflation, supply chain disruptions, and labor shortages due to COVID-19. The majority of organic purchases were produce, followed by grocery items, beverages, and dairy and eggs. But despite this growth, organic food production makes up less than 1% of all U.S. farmland, further complicating the gap between the need for organic food, its consumption, and the rise of food insecurity. So data from the Food Research and Action Center finds that approximately 12.5% or 1 in 8 American households face food insecurity. And at the same time, a staggering 30 to 40% of the US food supply is wasted each year. So this is equivalent to the weight of more than 450,000 fully loaded semi-trucks stretched roughly a quarter of the way around the equator. In the US, almost half of all food waste is generated in our homes, according to recent data from ReFed. Beyond the physical waste, this represents a massive loss of energy, water, and labor that went into producing, transporting, and preparing this food. So I'd like everyone to look at this chart of US dietary guidelines and US farm subsidies and tell me what they notice. And you can raise your hand or just shout it out.
Well, it's definitely not aligned.
Okay, can you expand on that?
Sorry. Well, it seems like the recommendations and guidelines are on the left-hand side, but the subsidies are not aligned with what's recommended.
Exactly. So we have on almost half of our dietary guidelines should be fruits and vegetables, and yet fruits and vegetables receive 4% of US farm subsidies, with the majority of farm subsidies going towards feed and other biofuels, ultra-processed foods, essentially. So this is a chart from the Congressional Budget Office of the Farm Bill subsidy spending projections from 2024 to 2033. So for those who might not be aware, the Farm Bill is a comprehensive piece of legislation passed by the US Congress roughly every 5 years that governs an array of agriculture and food programs. So it sets policies and funding for everything from crop insurance, farmer support, and conservation efforts. And it also funds food assistance programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So just looking at this chart, we can see that corn is 38% of total government subsidy spending. So this portion is nearly 4 times the amount that soybeans receive. And we can see that a significant share of subsidies support corn production. Soybeans are the second largest segment, accounting for 10% of farm subsidies, and followed by wheat, which receives 9%. So this infographic is made with data from the USDA, the Nebraska Farm Bureau, and other corn research organizations, and it shows how corn is used in everything from animal feed to ethanol production. So on the left-hand side here, we can see that the top 5 US corn exports go to Mexico, Japan, China, Colombia, and Korea. And we can also see that corn is mostly used for livestock feed for cows, chicken, and pigs. The second highest use is for ethanol production. Third highest is for exports, then sweeteners, starch, cereal, and in beverages like high fructose corn syrup. If you see that on a label, that's where the 1% of corn is going to. So while the substantial funding for corn production drives its use in various industries, it also contributes to a significant environmental and health challenge. This is just one example of how one crop that receives enormous subsidies has a global impact on our food system. The same can be said to a lesser extent for soybeans, barley, wheat, and oats. But with this in mind, let's delve into how these subsidies are linked to broader issues such as climate change, resource depletion, and their impact on our food system. So the substantial subsidies for crops like corn drive their overproduction, which exacerbates environmental issues. Climate change intensifies these problems through extreme weather, shifting growing seasons, and increasing pest pressures. For example, the record-breaking temperatures over the past 2 years significantly impacted crop yields. This change has contributed to a shift in U.S. hardiness zones, with the 2023 U.S. hardiness map shifting to about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the 2012 map across the contiguous United States. So half of the country now has a different growing zone than they did just a few years ago. The most change occurred in the central part of the country, like the Central Plains and the Midwest, where most of these crops are produced, and the least amount of change occurred in the Southwest. New York City fact, so though New York City stayed in the same zone, which is 7B, it did warm by 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Additionally, intensive farming practices encouraged by subsidies leads to soil degradation, affecting roughly 33% of all US cropland, and the overextraction of water resources. 70% of our fresh water is used for agricultural production, threatens future water supplies. So this focus on subsidized crops also impacts economic and social aspects of the food system. As highlighted in the previous slide, while subsidies for crops like corn contribute to a seemingly abundant food supply, the market for these crops is largely livestock feed and ethanol production, which is not the basis for a healthy diet. Large-scale production driven by subsidies means more intensive farming practices, which can place significant demands on farm workers. Farm workers face low wages, challenging working conditions as farms scale up to meet subsidy-driven production targets. This results in poor job quality and a dangerous working condition for farm workers. Subsidies also contribute to market concentration, where a few large corporations gain significant control over the food industry. Because federal subsidies favor large-scale industrial farming operations, smaller independent farmers struggle to compete. So these large corporations can then exert substantial influence over food prices and supply chains, and this market dominance reduces the autonomy of independent farmers, who have less bargaining power and fewer options to influence prices or farming practices. Consequently, this concentration can lead to higher prices for consumers and less equitable economic conditions for farmers. And recently we saw how the market concentration of infant formula impacted so many families when there was a food safety crisis at the Abbott plant. This crisis, like so many in the food system, impacted low-income households first and for the longest amount of time. So as we've seen, the emphasis on subsidized crops and market concentration in conventional agriculture has led to significant challenges in our food system. So now let's shift our focus to organic farming and explore why organic products often come with a higher price tag. So as we learned, organic food production makes up less than 1% of US agricultural land. Unlike conventional crops that benefit from substantial federal subsidies, organic farmers receive little to no financial assistance from the government. This lack of subsidies means that organic farms must bear the full cost of production without external financial assistance, which contributes to higher prices for organic products. Organic farmers also have to pay for their organic certification and audits, which can cost anywhere from hundreds to thousands of dollars a year. Organic farms tend to be smaller in scale compared to their conventional counterparts, and smaller farms often face higher per unit costs for production and distribution. This is partly due to less efficient economies of scale and the increased costs associated with managing smaller operations. The current challenges in our food system, ranging from environmental impacts to economic disparities, highlights the need for transformative changes. Moving forward, we can explore some innovative solutions that address these issues and offer practical ways to improve sustainability in agriculture. So drawing from my personal experience at Handsome Brook Farms, I've seen firsthand how technological advancements and thoughtful practices can make a difference. And there are several key areas where innovation is paving the way for more sustainable farming. So, for example, the integration of solar panels and other forms of renewable energy on farms, especially in livestock farming, can reduce emissions and energy costs, which significantly benefit larger operations that use a lot of energy to power their barns. Practices like rotational grazing not only enhance soil health, but also promote biodiversity. And incorporating trees and cover crops like clover and vetch for pasture-raised chickens enrich the soil and provide diverse diets for livestock. The ways in which nutrients are managed can also help optimize resource use and reduce waste, as I'm sure all of you know because you are aware of the Riverside Park Conservancy that has a composting program. For example, managing stormwater through gutters, downspouts, and drain tile, as well as implementing buffer strips where water runs off, can effectively manage nutrient runoff and protect water quality. And doing things like composting can help save resources and provide cheaper forms of fertilizer. So having explored innovative solutions and practices that are shaping the future of sustainable agriculture, it's valuable to see how these approaches play out in real-world scenarios. So to illustrate how these innovative approaches can be applied in real-world settings, I'd like to share an example of the work I did with farmers in the Handsome Brook network from the Finger Lakes region of New York. So meet the Martins. Vernon Martin and his family, his wife Karen and his daughter Kirsten, live in the Finger Lakes region of New York. And they were among the first farmers to join the Handsome Brook Farms network. Many of the farmers in this region have been with the company for nearly a decade. And almost all of these farmers are old order Amish or Mennonite, living in a close-knit community where they frequently share knowledge and support each other. They're also hesitant to accept money or assistance of any kind from the federal government due to their religious beliefs. So 5 years ago, when I began working at Handsome Brook Farms as a project manager, I visited these farmers to find ways to enhance their pasture. It quickly became clear that while pasture-raised hens need ample space, they also require safety and shelter to feel secure from predators. The result was that chickens tended to stay closer to the barn, leading to soil erosion and other issues around the barn's perimeter. The farmers I worked with in these early days became early adopters to Handsome Brook Farms' pilot cost share program. So the cost share program helped farmers receive funding for the cost of seeds, trees, equipment, and other resources to make their farms more sustainable. Fast forward a few years, and here we are at the inaugural grower gathering we hosted at Vernon's farm. The Martins were so receptive to the pilot program and its restorative approaches that they agreed to host all 12 farm families in the Finger Lakes, with Karen cooking a traditional Pennsylvania Dutch meal for all 50 attendees. The objectives of this gathering were to thank the farmers who work so hard to produce pasture-raised organic eggs every day, while also offering resources and testimonies to the cost share work that we embarked on. So this is a map of Vernon Martin's farm from above. At first, we brought in Tom Eskildson, a district conservationist from the Yates County Soil and Water Conservation District. Tom highlighted that many barns lacked proper gutters and downspouts, which exacerbated the erosion problem around the barns. So to address this, Tom worked with the farmers on environmental management plans, which is what you're looking at here. So looking at this map, you can see that Vernon's pasture is relatively open. There aren't a lot of shade sources around the barn. What you can't see on this map is that Vernon's farm is at a very large slant. It's on a hill where the top goes up, bottom goes down, and that increases the potential for nutrient runoff. So as you can see, Tom has highlighted where the gutters should be placed, what size they should be placed, what size he should purchase, and where it should drain out to the forested area on the side of Vernon's farm, creating a buffer strip. So Vernon was especially interested in planting trees in his pasture as a long-term solution for his hens, and because he wanted to improve the soil structure on the north side of his barn. So at first he tried transplanting baby trees from the forested area around his chicken pasture. And this is a photo of Vernon with a neighboring farmer, Lawrence Lead, who has his own tree nursery for container evergreen trees. So because they're in the same community, Vernon trusted Lawrence to assist with the planting. And the planting took a few days, a bit longer than Vernon anticipated. And unfortunately, the following spring, Vernon found that none of the transplanted trees had survived, despite his efforts to protect the trees with mulch and fence protection from the hens. So at this point, in June 2021, we decided to bring in Steve Gabriel, who is an agroforestry expert that lives in nearby Trumansburg. Because he was a farmer, Vernon was very trustful with him and wanted to hear what he had to say about trees in the pasture. So this is Vernon and Steve examining the tree mortality. Vernon also planted sorghum Sudan grass upon Tom from the Soil and Water Conservation District's suggestion. And the sorghum Sudan grass, which you can see in the last picture, proved to be successful in managing phosphorus from the chicken manure. And it also provided additional benefits, such as feed for local cattle farmers. The chickens also got further outside of the barn since they felt protected, and they like to eat the tender shoots. So you can see them almost head height with the sorghum Sudan grass, and it continued to grow to about 6 feet. And the chickens really loved just being inside the sorghum Sudan grass. But since sorghum Sudan grass is an annual crop, it has to be replanted every year. So Vernon was still searching for longer term and less maintenance intensive options. So we worked with Steve Gabriel on Vernon's replanting project the following spring. This is a photo of Steve hosting a tree tour on Vernon's farm. Steve suggested planting a diversity of native trees from reputable sources and taught us that the first step to success in planting trees is to prepare the site and to get good tree stock. So we worked with local trusted nurseries that provided high quality saplings, and by the fall at the first grower gathering, Vernon and Steve could show the other farmers what they were looking at. And Steve in this picture is showing the farm families a honey locust tree that had been planted as a cutting and had grown 2 feet in just a few months. So honey locusts help with soil erosion. They're good trees to plant for windbreaks, which curb the impact of extreme weather and absorb the ammonia smells from the barn. And Steve is also demonstrating the benefit of the tree tube, which is that green cylindrical thing you see around the tree, and that prevents voles and other rodents from disturbing the roots of the newly planted trees. And this is that same honey locust just this past summer. So around 2 years since planting, it's already creating enough shade for the chickens, and Vernon is very pleased with the results of the planting project. So at the grower gathering in 2022, we also provided farmers with flyers that explained the benefits of planting trees in the pasture. On the flyers, we shared research that Steve had come across from a large free-range supplier in the UK called Lakes Free Range. So in the UK, free range is equivalent to our pasture-raised standard, essentially just guaranteeing that the birds have a certain amount of space outside the barn. In his research, Steve found that in the UK, free-range layer hen systems operating at a medium to large scale, as low as 10% of the flock would make full use of the pasture throughout their life cycle. So it was important to find solutions to encourage the hens to fully utilize the pasture. So when Lakes Free Range started planting trees on the pasture, and then and then incorporated it into their business model. It improved egg quality and increased the welfare of the hens. So specifically what this means for layer hen operations is that they have more grade A eggs they can sell. The flock is less stressed, there's less pecking, and ultimately the birds live healthier lives because they're outside of the barn more. We also, we worked with a local illustrator to design the flyers, which made for just very nice handouts to give the farmers at the grower gathering. So the grower gathering and the tree tour on Vernon's farm was a success. And here are a couple of the farmers that decided to try planting trees as part of the results of the grower gathering. So Luke Nolt, on the very end in the green hoodie, planted a mixture of hardwood and softwood trees around the backside of his barn, where he has a manure shed, to create a windbreak and absorb the ammonia smells from his manure shed. And Elton Martin, who's right next to him holding his daughter, planted elderberries around his barn with the assistance of Steve Gabriel and our tree planting team. And Elton had a lot of experience with horticulture, so elderberries felt like a very good fit for him. And elderberries have taken off across the Handsome Brook network because of their adaptability, their quick growth, and their shade potential for the hens. They're also relatively low maintenance, so something that's at this height, which is this past summer, Elton will mow that down, and the next summer it'll grow back even taller. So the berries and the flowers also provide a value-added crop for farmers to sell within their local communities. And here are some recent photos of both Elton's elderberries and Luke's windbreak. And you can see that that area right there is where his manure is pushed into. So the idea is for those trees to create a screen for the manure, but also to encourage the birds to go further out than they're typically used to. So with this pilot project, over 1,000 trees and shrubs were planted across 4 farms throughout the course of the year. And this experience provided insights and some true cost accounting on tailored approaches for tree planting, but it also highlighted challenges like weather impacts and labor and maintenance implications. So the project demonstrated that the success of agroforestry initiatives depends on strong collaboration between farmers, consultants, and supporting organizations. And it emphasized the need for continued mutual support and resource sharing. It also demonstrated the importance of ongoing maintenance, farmer education, and tailored strategies that address specific environmental conditions and farm needs in sustaining the long-term survival of planted trees. And finally, the project demonstrated that incorporating trees into layer hen operations can significantly improve farm sustainability, biodiversity, and overall resilience. So ecologically, we want the plants to work together, and socially, we need to come together to build mutual aid networks that can help us implement solutions that will ultimately benefit everyone. So the pilot project was funded through the company. We had $500,000 to work with these farmers and also farmers in Kentucky and across the Handsome Brook network. So the pilot project demonstrated that the success of agroforestry initiatives depends on strong collaboration among farmers, consultants, and supporting organizations, and emphasized the need for continued mutual support and resource sharing. And the success of this project influenced our subsequent proposals and awards for a USDA Conservation Innovation Grant in Kentucky for $340,000 in improvements on 5 farms. So the company was awarded that grant in 2021. And the 5 research farms are measuring how improvements to pasture-raised layer hen farms impact soil health, biodiversity, greenhouse gas emissions, water quality, and farm profitability. Last year, we also received a $2 million USDA Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities grant, which will enroll more than 70 farmers over the course of 5 years in projects that are focused on pasture health, hen health, improving energy efficiency in the barn, enhancing air quality, and expanding climate-smart egg marketing efforts across the farm network. So now I'd like to transition to an activity where we'll test some soil. This is to kind of simulate one of the tests that we do on farm, and it's called a slake test. So I would like to choose 2 volunteers. Does anyone want to come up and, okay, 1, 2, perfect. All right, so we're going to take soil that's from 2 different parts of a farm, and we're going to test their aggregate stability. So the first sample is from a perennial plot of, it's called Iron Vine, and this is from Hilltop Hanover Farm in Yorktown Heights, New York. So Hilltop Hanover Farm is a research and education farm. So sample A is from a 4-year perennial plot. Sample B is from a plot that they have tilled, and they're going to be planting vegetables there, but it's kind of overgrown with crabgrass, and so they've had to do a bit of tilling to remove the top layer of soil. So this is our sample A, and this is our sample B. So you guys can choose which one you want, and you're going to take just a small piece and put it in that mesh container. So we've got 1 piece. Yep, perfect. There it goes. And piece number 2. So what can we tell about the samples? They're both going pretty quickly, actually.
Yeah. This one's a little sieving a little more, though.
Mm-hmm. So that one's going faster.
Yeah. Mine's kind of slowed.
Both the humidity seems the same.
Yes.
Sample B is much grosser. This is more fine.
More fine. Okay.
Fine.
So this one is holding together a little bit better, sample A, and sample B is a little bit finer.
This is
Mm-hmm.
the dimensions are bigger than this, but apparently, if it stays in the surface, it could. I don't know what the dynamic would be in the preservation of water.
Mm.
That is
Something is keeping this one from
precipitated.
Yes.
breaking up
Yeah.
than as opposed to this one.
Exactly.
Less
So
bubbles on the surface, more bubbles.
amazing. Yes. Okay, let's give it up for our volunteers. Thank you guys so much. So as our volunteers showed, the healthy soil, which is sample A, retains its structure because it's composed of organic matter and soil microorganisms that are binding those soil particles together to form stable aggregates. So these aggregates resist breaking apart in water, and that is allowing the soil to hold onto that water, support its plant roots, and maintain its integrity over time. On the other hand, on sample B, we have a field that's been tilled. The soil is kind of out in the open. It's drier. It's not going to hold on to that water that well, and that's why it's disintegrating much more quickly into the water. You can see that the water quality is cloudier. So for healthy food, what this means is that crops grown in well-structured, healthy soil are more likely to thrive and produce nutrient-rich, resilient plants. Healthy soil also supports better water retention and nutrient availability, which leads to higher quality food that's both more nutritious and sustainable. From the successful partnerships between farmers and scientists, we can find solutions that benefit the food system. At a national scale, we have these solutions, but what we lack is an incentive to prioritize climate solutions and to ensure that the food system is sustainable. So a major incentive is needed to promote sustainable regenerative agriculture in the way that subsidies are currently incentivizing the production of corn, soy, and wheat. And more healthful food needs to be directed to everyone. Access to food should be a human right. Cities can source from farmers that use sustainable practices and incentivize these collaborations between farmers and scientists working to create a better food system, especially for urban farms. And here are some examples of ways that policies in New York City are impacting the food system. So the Food Forward New York City 10-year plan is New York City's way to create a more equitable, sustainable, and resilient food system by improving food access, promoting sustainable practices, and supporting local economies. And one of the ways that New York City has done that is through enrolling in the Good Food Purchasing Program, which guides public institutions in New York City to buy food that supports health, sustainability, and equity, benefiting local farmers, benefiting animal welfare, and ultimately reducing carbon footprints and enhancing that food quality in public settings. Another way is through the Plant-Powered Carbon Challenge, which encourages any organization that serves food in New York to reduce their carbon footprint by increasing plant-based meals, raising awareness about the environmental benefits of plant-based diets, and contributing to New York City's sustainability goals. So these are just some examples of how food policy can have a positive impact on the food system. So if you take this holistic approach, the most impactful change at scale is a national policy. And as we talked about earlier, the Farm Bill is a comprehensive piece of legislation passed by the US Congress roughly every 5 years, governs an array of agricultural and food programs. And in this upcoming Farm Bill, which has been delayed since last year and will likely be delayed this year, farm and advocacy groups are calling on transformative policies that support the growth of organic agriculture, reduce food waste, implement healthy soil practices, invest in clean energy and rural development, grow regional food systems, improve equity and access throughout the agricultural system, and enhance climate resilience across the farm and food supply chain. While we wait for these national policies, everyday people continue to meet and find food system solutions in their community. Community-based solutions also offer promising models for a sustainable food future. So community fridges, like One Love Community Fridge in New York City, are grassroots initiatives set up across an expanse of neighborhoods to provide free, accessible food to those in need. These fridges are typically stocked by donations from individuals, local businesses, and community organizations. They play a dual role in combating food insecurity and reducing food waste by ensuring that surplus food is distributed to people who can use it rather than ending up in landfills. The idea is to create a decentralized network of mutual aid where community members can donate and access food. And community fridges are really important because they fill a gap from food banks that typically are giving out processed and shelf-stable foods. Or other organizations like Rethink Food, also based in New York City, focus on recovering surplus food from restaurants, grocery stores, and other food providers. Instead of letting this food go to waste, they redirect it to community organizations, shelters, and other places where it can be used to feed those in need. Groups such as the New York City Food Policy Council, for example, work to influence and advocate for food-related policies on the local level. they bring together stakeholders from various sectors, government, nonprofits, businesses, and community groups to discuss and promote policies that support local food systems. So this can include advocating for better food access, sustainable agriculture practices, and support for local food producers. And their work typically involves research, policy recommendations, and public education to strengthen and improve the overall food system. And so when I was working at the Food Policy Center, we were focused on increasing access and knowledge about the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So while programs like that are really great and helpful for people, a lot of people that are qualified for those programs don't know that they qualify, and the applications are often very cumbersome and difficult to manage, especially if you don't use technology that often. So the campaign that we worked on was to get people enrolled in SNAP and just make it easier for them to access the benefits that they're already eligible for. These collaborative efforts and innovative solutions set the stage for impactful local initiatives. So through my work with Handsome Brook Farms, I helped develop a partnership with One Love Community Fridge and Rethink Food, and coordinated bi-weekly egg donations throughout New York City, where 1.4 million residents face food insecurity. So each month since July of last year, a pallet of eggs are sent to Rethink Food's commissary kitchen, where they're transformed into nutritious meals, as you can see in this photo on the right. These meals are then distributed to community organizations, ensuring that healthy food reaches the families that need it the most. And One Love Community Fridge receives these deliveries from Rethink Food and stocks community fridges throughout the city, which makes this food accessible and also gives people the choice in what they want to make, whereas food banks typically will give people just a bag of food. They don't have any choice or dignity with that process. In 1 year, Handsome Brook Farms has donated over 20,000 pounds of eggs, contributing to more than 8,000 meals for New Yorkers facing food insecurity. These solutions have helped promote resilience and sustainability at the community level, and there's still so much more to be done to increase access to healthy, fresh food. So at this point, I'd like to open the floor to your ideas and innovations. So we can either break into small groups or just kind of let me know the solutions that you envision at any level, farm, city, national, international. What kind of food policies would you like to see implemented? So maybe I'll give everyone like a couple minutes. Oh, we already have one.
Publicize how much money is given to various candidates by Aedan.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. Yep.
I'm working on a project in Harlem where we're kind of an ecocentric movement where we're trying to give soil or compost the rights of nature. It's the like highest form of protection after like land trust and all that. So these microhabitats having this idea and this role of like ecocentric law. So I'm working with lawyers from Earth Law Center, if anyone knows them. And so if anyone wants to ask about that, I think it's also a way to, on a city urban level, to help protect little microhabitats, starting with compost.
Absolutely, that's so important, especially with all the hullabaloo happening with compost in New York City. So,
I think more community gardens would be good for some type of way for maybe the city or the local governments to try and, I guess, incentivize people to open them or engage with them.
absolutely, yeah. Community gardens are so important, and often they face, at least in cities, they face the challenge of no land ownership, and so they can easily be turned over, where farming takes so long to establish a good soil structure and food to eat. So that's a great one too. Yeah.
I don't know that I've seen this a lot before, but potentially like rooftop greenhouses to take advantage of the space that we have literally every single building in the city.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes.
This is more of like a distribution of like a product kind, but I think what we also need to see is index insurance products for farmers to better mitigate against weather risks, which are going to become more and more prominent as a result of climate change. So protecting them from that and then incentivizing adoption of CSA practices.
Yes, so insurance for farmers that are actually farming food and not just subsidies. That's great.
I would like to see some of the subsidies that go to meat and dairy instead go to alternative meat, and particularly lab-grown meat. It's like very interesting, and it's starting to become more prevalent, but part of the issue is that it doesn't scale, and part of the reason for that is just so expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of research being done there, and you're right, it's still very expensive, so more research would help lower those costs. Yeah.
Having more pollinators and protecting them,
That's
and
so
advocating legally for. We recently had the governor of the state sign a law prohibiting an insecticide that was killing the pollinators.
That's very important. Yes. Yep.
Be upfront about which pollinators are native and which are trucked around.
Yes. Yeah, we've seen a lot of spotted lantern flies. I'm sure you all have seen a lot of them. Yeah, go ahead.
The community gardens that are up in rooftop gardens in particular, without maybe hydroponic pods and so forth on public schools on the rooftops, where youth, middle school to high schools, after school programs where they can go upstairs and, you know, those pilot programs take years. But that would be a wonderful thing to have it as even a career pathway for our youth in urban farming. And with legislative being passed now in New York City with, you know, renewable energy and have the buildings to come up to code, that would be right aligned with that kind of STEM project in schools.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so many opportunities for job creation and just making buildings more sustainable. Yeah.
Building off the point on community gardens, as in not just increasing the number, but also giving them the advisory and the guidance to actually increase the productivity in those so that they can actually fulfill the requirements of at least the neighboring communities.
Yeah, so more productive urban gardens. Yes.
I'd just see more regulation on communication about like where our food comes from and what's going into it. I think there's a lot of confusion for consumers. We have organic and now we have regenerative organic. I love the regenerative movement, but I think it gets consumers confused about really like what it all means and what we should be buying. Because I think a lot of consumers do have the right, like they want to put their dollar in the right place, but aren't always share and
Yeah, absolutely. And just working for an egg company, I get that all the time of like, oh, which eggs do I buy? Why are there so many? So definitely agree with that. Yeah.
So I'm from Singapore, and we were just talking about the liability with food donations, right? Singapore's just passed a law that actually absolves companies from liability if they give food that is just still around the best buy date, and that helps to give them like donations, helps them donate the food without fear of legal repercussions as well. So I think maybe that's a possible policy solution that can be considered.
We should borrow some policies from Singapore. Yeah.
I want to piggyback off of what you were saying a little bit, and just incorporating more education into like the amount of time, like just food preservation altogether. Like I know that some foods best by date is this day, but if you like smell it or look at it, it's like, okay, this is fine. So I always think that best by dates are suggestive, but not everyone has the same opinion.
Yes. And a quick egg hack actually for testing whether an egg is still good, which eggs typically stay good for like 90 days after sale. And one way you can test it is if you put an egg in a glass of water and it sinks to the bottom, it's good. And if it floats, then it's bad. So, yeah.
I was going to say like more incentives on local food versus exports.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me that produce from like California is cheaper than the produce that we can get locally.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absent comprehensive water rights reform in the U.S., regulation and incentives around the types of crops that can be grown where that best fit the environmental situation that is at hand.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very topical one too. Yeah.
Just I guess a comment and curiosity. I mean, your farm is a private company, and yet you're doing all this outreach to help fellow farmers, and you're here helping us with information and education. I think that's kind of wonderful and amazing that a private company would take these extra steps. Are you working with other companies that maybe have that ability?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important for companies to fund these types of projects. There was recent research done by the Boston Consulting Group that found that regenerative agriculture practices typically take 3 to 4 years to implement without a positive benefit on farmer economics. And so the need for companies that work with farmers to fund these types of projects is very urgent and can really help fill that gap between, starting those practices and then becoming profitable off of the results of that. So I know that there are definitely companies doing similar work. McCain, I think, the potato company, they do, we actually really borrowed a lot from their cost share program. They have a tiered approach to farmers enrolling in regenerative agriculture practices. Ben and Jerry's does a caring dairy program. So they have also a tiered approach of if you do this many practices, you get paid more, essentially, per gallon of milk or whatever it is. So there are definitely great companies out there doing very good work. And B Corp is actually a good indicator of whether a company is doing these types of social and environmental programs. I helped Handsome Brook become B Corp certified, but if you go on the B Corp database, you can see different companies and how they score. It's an assessment, and there's different impact areas. And so some companies have really great programs for farmers. I know some of them have really great programs like social programs, one of which is Grayston Bakery, which is based in Yorktown, and they have an open hiring policy, meaning they don't do background checks on any of their employees. So yeah, B Corp is a really great certification to look into if you're interested in more socially conscious food brands. Awesome. Well, I feel like you guys should be writing the food policies in the world, honestly. So I just want to thank you guys so much. This has been really great. And I'm just going to leave up a list of resources. This is a QR code if you want to take your phone out. And yeah, if you want to add to this list, feel free to send me a request to edit if there are resources you'd like to share. And I can open it up to questions now. How are we doing on time? Yep. No, we're good. Okay. Yep.
And right at the beginning of your talk, you made a statement about trucks lining up around the world.
Yes.
How is produce really shipped? Is it shipped by trucks or trains? Or obviously a combination, but what's the breakdown?
That's a good question. I'm not too sure about produce, but I can tell you that things that need to be refrigerated are typically trucked. This is for efficiency purposes. So, for example, some of the work that I've done is exploring different options for transport because transport is a huge hotspot in the supply chain. The kind of barrier that we hit is that train systems for freight are just not as efficient, and really the infrastructure isn't there. So essentially a truck would have to drive to the train depot, then that train would, take longer to get to its destination. And then from the train depot would also have to be picked up by a truck. And so while you're probably using less emissions, it's still logistically complicated and not really set up for how our supply chain works for food and grocery stores, honestly. But yeah, it's a really good opportunity to build out our train infrastructure because we know that that's already a better, more efficient way to transport food. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That was all really valuable. And I was really struck by the sort of farmer network program that you guys were leading because I've been hearing a lot of that feedback of farmers learning from each other is the most effective and that sort of thing. So I was wondering what were some of the biggest challenges you faced in that and what Handsome Brook's role was in facilitating that sort of meeting and learning from each other.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the biggest challenges that we faced was because the farmers are Amish and Mennonite, they really just they want to be left alone, essentially. They don't want anyone to come and tell them what to do. And so it was very much an approach of trust and working with experts that we knew they would relate to and that they would listen to, and just kind of taking every farm that is in the network is different, and every farm has different needs and different background. And so really just working at it as like in a site-specific context was super important, and really just getting the trust and the buy-in to do these projects with them. And I think a lot of the farmers were very grateful because these are projects that they wanted to do, but just didn't have the extra money to do. And so by pairing like something like tree planting with something like building gutters and putting those on the barn, that was something that was very helpful to them and just made them more receptive to trying new things. Yeah.
I'm curious, I've heard that the term organic, or when you see organic on a label, that not all of those labels are created equal. Mm-hmm. That it can be kind of, how do I describe it? That I guess that's what I wanted to ask. When one thing says organic and a different thing says organic and they have different labels, right? It's not necessarily held to the same standards, right? There's different term types of evaluating or grading for organic, right?
There can be. So basically, all farms in the Handsome Brook network are certified organic under the National Organic Program. But within the National Organic Program, there are different certifying agencies. And those are all actually nonprofits that are using auditors that they're paying on like a contract basis to perform these audits. So from certification to certification, there's just a lot of differences in their rules, and honestly, like by auditor, it's just a different experience. And so the main organic certification we use is PCO, which is Pennsylvania Certified Organic. But there are, you're right, there are differences in certifying agencies, and one of the organizations that isn't certified organic is the Real Organic Project, and it's kind of a group of people that are farming organically, but not wanting to spend all that money on the organic certification. So yeah, it is very complex. There's also differences within humane certifications. For example, we use 2 different kinds based on the site specificity of the farms. and it's really like a spatial kind of requirement. So yeah, once you start digging into those differences, it gets really, really interesting.
Do you think that the certification process or things would have to be kind of simplified or consolidated in order to help encourage or make, in the future with hopefully, like you said, with more government subsidies going into organic farming?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the way that organic farming and produce and all this different stuff is considered organic will need to be kind of more consolidated into a more streamlined process?
Probably, yeah. I think that the organic industry has made pretty big strides in informing legislation. So, for example, a recent law that was passed was in organic poultry and pigs, I believe, that is that any eggs or poultry or pigs that are labeled organic must have outdoor access, and that's going to go into effect next year. So there are ways that the industry is kind of pushing legislation to be better for animal welfare and for ultimately for human health. But I agree that things need to be streamlined. And kind of going back to like the Farm Bill priorities, there are so many different coalition groups that are essentially asking for the same things, but they're saying it differently. And I think that if we all kind of came together and had one platform, that would make things so much easier. But yeah, obviously there's a lot of politics involved. But yes, streamlining is definitely a good idea. Yeah.
So hopefully this should be an easy question. When I go to the grocery store, should I be buying free-range eggs, pasture-raised eggs, certified human, organic, or any of the other 10 labels that I see on that like egg crate, which confuses me more than clarifies?
Yeah, that's a
What is
really
the highest quality within all of those?
That's a very good question. So I can tell you what I do, which is I generally buy eggs from my local farmers market. The reason for that is because I know exactly where it's coming from, and I can talk to the farmer about how they are managing their eggs. And when I can't buy from the local farmer, I will typically get free range or pasture raised organic with the humane certification. And the reason for that is because I know that there's so many like GMOs and chemicals in conventional animal feed. So I prefer to buy something that's organic. And I also know that free range and pasture raised hens are getting space outside of the barn. And so they're able to go outside. So I just know that it's a higher welfare standard. But yes, there definitely should be more transparency around those different labels and just make it easier for people to buy their staple foods.
So all labels.
Yeah, I mean that's what I do. Yes, yeah. And all of these certifications have websites where you can, read their standards and see what they require. And it is quite stringent. Like for the humane certification, the flock supervisors that work within our network, they're testing ammonia on a weekly basis. They're visiting the farms on a bi-weekly basis. So they're making sure that everything is in check. Yeah.
I'm also curious if you know on an organic, in your instance, an organic egg farm, I suppose is the term. Do you know how you're able to quantify the difference in environmental impact on like an organic, like the farms you're involved in, as opposed to like factory farm, egg farm? I'd imagine there is a different impact on the environment.
Yeah. Well, I guess in like a conventional farm versus organic, like organic free range or pasture raised at this point, there's definitely going to be more ammonia, which is contributing to greenhouse gases. But I think there are trade-offs potentially. I mean, if you have, it's kind of all about the management. So if you have a farm that is, you know, not managing it properly, then any bad thing can turn into a terrible scenario. But typically, I think, yeah, the conventional farms will have more ammonia build up. The birds won't get to go outside, so their quality of life is just worse. And the feed that they're eating is also a lesser quality. So yeah, I think there's trade-offs, and the management style is really what's going to make or break the difference. That said, there is a company called Kipster, and they are a Dutch company that just came to the US. And they are doing indoor bird raising, but they have what's essentially like little playground areas for the birds, so that they are kind of like inside like a glassed-in area, kind of like this, where they have access to different kinds of things to not get bored and not be pecking at each other. So I think it's all about like kind of doing the research into the brands that you like, and yeah, just asking a lot of questions, because typically, in my experience at least, brands will be pretty responsive to that.